more lectures in this spring's lecture series. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Joe Cain from University College London. And before I sort of introduce a little bit further, as we kind of know from watching the Super Bowl, sometimes the commercials are more exciting than the actual event. So I got a few ads for you. First, I'd like to pitch our next speaker series talk. This will be March 1st, Tuesday, same time, same place. Dr. Mark Largent will be talking about vaccination. Also coming up on Sunday is the Darwin Discovery Day at the MSU Museum. This is actually kind of a lead-in to this wonderful event. Happens annually. This is one of the real premier sort of events for science in Michigan State University. It's really suitable from everything from really young children to, what would I say, from 9 to 109. So it's a really celebration, not just of Darwin, but a celebration of the natural world. And you want to go and hold snakes. I don't. Some people do. Or bugs. Bugs don't bother me. So come to the MSU Museum 1 p.m. or to 5 p.m. and you're guaranteed to really kind of have a wonderful time. One final then pitch before I sort of bring Joe on the stage. If you are an undergraduate and you are excited by the idea of Darwin in London, we have a really exciting sort of opportunity that you can study Darwin literally in London. My colleague Jim Smith and I are running a study abroad program, History of Science in Europe, in the first 3 weeks of July. So if you're looking for a study abroad, you don't have anything better to do in the first few weeks of July, we'd love to have you and talk to us after the talk. But now, I would like to bring Joe on the stage. I've known Joe for a very long time. He, don't let the, University College London, so if you come up and you expect somebody with a really nice English accent, you're about to be very desperately disappointed. He's probably the most American guy that I know, even after now 20 years in the Science and Technology Studies Department of University College London. So to translate STS into kind of Greek speak, that's their equivalent of what we call HPS, History, Philosophy, Sociology of Science. Joe is a professor of the history and philosophy of biology. His main sort of research is looking at the period of what they call the modern synthesis of evolutionary biology in the middle decades of the 20th century. So it's absolutely sort of pivotal time in the history of sort of biology and evolutionary theory more broadly. Among his other passions is the Crystal Palace dinosaurs. Now these are a remarkable series of sculptures, life-size sculptures of dinosaurs produced in the 1850s. Now we look at these and they don't look anything like dinosaurs that we would recognize today, but that makes them all the cooler. And so these still exist in Crystal Palace in London, and like anything that's over 150 years old, there's some real conservation issues. So Joe has been very active in not just sort of understanding them as a matter of history, but preserving them as physical objects for future sort of generations. And so today, join me in welcoming Joe, who's going to talk to us about Darwin in London.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, everybody, for coming. I'm still on London time, I'm afraid, so I'm 5 hours ahead. It's just past midnight 30 for me, so if I nap over here, you'll know why. Darwin in London, the plan for today. I discovered a fact about London, or about Darwin. I discovered a fact. One fact in this massively dense, heavily populated discipline of Darwin scholarship. I discovered a fact, and I'm so excited about it. I'm going to tell you about it. I'm going to tell you the fact. You have to wait. Because there's a story. They've got chemistry homework. You guys have other things to do. And I'm just going to walk around and let Rich do the camera thing for a bit. So we'll see how it goes. The fact we'll get to. One fact. And if you remember nothing else about this talk tonight, just remember the one fact. You will remember it, I promise you. By the time we get there, you definitely will remember it. But before we do that, I wanted to plug a little bit about the Darwin in London business that Rich was talking about, and I wanted to just hit a few themes. What's so exciting for See, Rich told me that there were going to be about 150 undergraduates here, and I'm so delighted you guys have come. anyway. And he said, just keep it that level. So we'll see how it goes. If it's too simple, well, I'll just work with it. Okay, just feel smart. I think that's what we do. So Darwin in London. It matters where history happens, where it happens, not just when it happens, and not just what happens, but where. And that connection between space and event is so important to me as a historian. I mean, I live in London. I spend a lot of time walking the streets and trying to connect some event with the architecture, or with the parks, or with the artifacts of this space. And so Darwin in London, I really mean to think about Darwin in that space of London. What can we learn? And thinking about connecting individual facts to larger stories in history, that's what professional historians are all about. Not just knowing the facts. Like you guys were saying, you can't just memorize stuff. You have to know it inside and out. And this is part of that process. So here's a great example. It's Down House. You may recognize this. This is one of Darwin's family homes. They moved here in the 1840s. This is in the suburbs of London. And for a lot of people remembering Darwin's story ever so slightly wrongly, they remember it as a really isolated space. But if you go there, and here's the big point, if you go to that space, you can see with your own two eyes that it's not at all isolated, that it's highly connected to a local village, it's highly connected to a commuter rail system that was alive when Darwin was living there, it's highly connected to a postal system. Darwin was anything but isolated. And if you go to a place like that, you can walk around and you can feel that connection. Not from a 21st century point of view with telephones and airplanes and other things flying about, but certainly from the 19th century physical space of being there. Well, Darwin and Darwin's family moved to Down House in 1842. By then, it's all over for me because they've moved out of London, and the interesting stuff ends there. The fact that I wanted to tell you isn't connected to Down House. It's connected to other things. So let's just roll around London a little bit. And I'll point to a few things that connect to Darwin's story. Again, if you know this, just feel smart. Being smart is good, right? Being smart is good. So this is another example. I'll ask you guys if you, I think I put 7 or 8 examples here that I was going to walk through. Does anybody in the room
Westminster?
recognize this?
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead. No, say it with confidence.
Westminster Abbey!
Westminster Abbey. Excellent. Yes, indeed
Buried
it is.
there.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the connection to Darwin? Darwin is buried in Westminster Abbey, and nowadays there's so much sentimental scientist delivery of flowers around Darwin's grave, it's a bit disgusting, but nevertheless, Darwin's buried in Westminster Abbey. Now, if you take courses here, you know for sure that there's a story to tell about that fact. So it's not just enough to know that Darwin's buried in Westminster Abbey. You should know that a couple of people worked extremely hard to get Darwin buried in Westminster Abbey. Darwin didn't want to be buried in Westminster Abbey. He had already paid for the plot in the local church. And if you go to the local church near Down House, you'll see the blank space on the gravestone that was supposed to say Charles Darwin's buried here, but he isn't buried there, so there's nothing there. He's off in Westminster Abbey. So the fact of Westminster Abbey and Darwin's buried there, brilliant, well done. The deeper meaning is there's a larger story to tell there. And it's not just enough to know that he's buried there. The historian needs to know why. That's the bigger thing. So that's one example of various things. Another example, in London, why the space is important, is London Zoo. Dead giveaway. I have this. I used to show this slide and say, does anybody know where this is, what this is? And then of course I twigged that I was sort of giving it away. But the London Zoo, the zoological gardens opened in the 1820s. The zoological gardens, not the zoo, the zoological gardens. Darwin and Emma went to the zoo when they lived in London. They spent lovely Saturday afternoons strolling in the zoo. Most everybody in the room knows that there were primates in the zoo, and most everybody in the room knows that Darwin went and saw the primates, and that affected him. that he thought about the primates and he watched the primates. He watched the primates like an orangutan that was new and really unusual in the 1830s for people to see. Darwin went there and watched it, as people do today. Any primate in any zoo, they go and look, and you can just listen. Oh, he just does what Uncle Louie does. He just did that. Everyone does that, and Darwin did it too. He wrote note to self. He wrote one thing that's really racist and one thing that's connected to his life right at that very moment. The one thing that's really racist is he said, look at that orangutan, and he reminded him of his voyage of the Beagle, which he had relatively recently been on. Darwin goes to the zoo for sure in 1838, and he writes this note. He'd just come back from the Beagle, 1836, so not that far away, a couple of years. It's fresh in his mind, more or less. And he says, you know what, look at that orangutan and compare it to the Fuegians, the people in Tierra del Fuego, the very bottom tip of South America. Darwin thought the Fuegians were the most primitive people in the world. And so the furthest away from the advanced Europeans that he thought of. The Fuegians, Darwin said, compare the orangutan to the Fuegian, and you tell me the difference is big. So there you go. Darwin went to the zoo. That's the fact. That's easy. The deeper meaning of it is Darwin put the zoo to work for him, thinking about human origins and making this connection. That's a slightly racist one because the primitiveness of the Fuegians is in Darwin's mind. It's not really in the Fuegians' behavior. Another thing that Darwin did at the zoo was, well, when he became a father, he did what most parents do, and he thinks deeply about the animal behavior of the organism in front of them, and tries to make some connections again to the animals. And Darwin's notes on the behavior of his first son make explicit reference to animal behavior, drawing connections. So Darwin went to the zoo, that's the fact. We know that for sure. The deeper meaning of the fact is the important thing, really the thing worth remembering, and that is Darwin very explicitly, very quickly, very early did what we all do naturally today, and is think about the biological, zoological, evolutionary, behavioral connections to the organisms around us. Another example, very quickly, if you go on the tour, you go on the Darwin in London enterprise that is building here at MSU, well done. You'll go to this place. Now this is going to be a hard one, and I'll be very impressed if anybody on this side of the room knows. Anybody on this side of the room? Any guesses? It's okay. Come on, you can impress me. No? Okay, there'll be other chances to impress. Don't you worry. Like the planetarium, it's fantastic, but I don't have any pictures of the planetarium, so just go that. Anybody over here? Stop. Anybody over here? Give it a yell. What is it? Natural History Museum. That's so not what it is. But well done. It's close. Brave. It's the Athenaeum Club. And the phrase gentleman's club now has the really quite different meaning. But the idea of an old boy network place where the great and the good get together to socialize, this kind of gentleman's club. The Athenaeum Club was was started in the 1820s. And it was set up as it's like the Lyman Briggs of London. It's set up as that's pretty good. That was an excellent connection. It's set up as the place where the best and the brightest in every field come together. But I'm really sucking up for my dinner. And the best and the brightest come together to talk about world events. And Darwin got himself elected to the Athenaeum Club. The story of Darwin's time in London, He's been to university, he was on the Beagle, he's returned from the Beagle, he's decided to make his life as a scientist, and that's 1836, 1837, 1838, 1839. What he's doing, he's living in London in order to, I suppose nowadays we would say network, to build his social networks in science, to establish his reputation as a man of science. The way you did it in the 1830s was you joined the right societies, you joined the right clubs. The Athenaeum is at the top of the hierarchy of those clubs, and when Darwin got himself elected, he got himself elected by his friends who were eminent scientists, and they vouched for him, so he joined the Athenaeum Club. What's great about the Athenaeum Club from Darwin's point of view is that Darwin was cheap. He was tight with his money, very tight with his money. And in the day, if you wanted to read a lot of newspapers and use a library, there just weren't university libraries the way that there are today. And the best place to use the best library were in the gentlemen's clubs, because they got together to put the libraries together. And Darwin loved the library at the Athenaeum Club, and that's where some of Darwin's big intellectual moments take place, is there in that particular building. So the fact is, that's the Athenaeum Club. Darwin was elected to the Athenaeum Club very early on. The deeper meaning of that fact is it really mattered. It was part of the plan. It was this, I'm going to say now, the CV item. It was a CV item for him. It was get elected to the Athenaeum Club, because not only from the networking point of view, but also the validation point of view. To say to people, I was elected to the Athenaeum Club, you're supposed to go, ooh, you must be smart. And that's exactly what Darwin wanted. Along exactly the same lines, if you go to London, you're going to go to this place, definitely. It's a place called Burlington House. It's a house owned by somebody named Burlington, so there you go, easy to remember. It currently is an art museum. It's a fabulous art museum. In the 19th century, in the middle part of the 19th century, that was the home to the scientific societies in London. The scientific societies included those that you've heard of. You've heard of the Royal Society. You've heard of the Geological Society. You may have heard of the Linnean Society. Those are the places where the very specialist scientists got together to talk about their specialist stuff. When Darwin came back from the voyage of the Beagle in 1836, and he decided he was going to become a man of science, he decided he wanted to be a geologist first because he was in love. He had a bromance, is that what they call them? Bromance? Rich, help me out. Bromance with Lyell?
Sure.
It was a bromance with Charles Lyell, the eminent geologist. Generation before him, Darwin read Lyell's books on the Beagle. He became an advocate of Lyell's not widely accepted views about how geological processes work. And when Darwin lands, he lands on the Beagle right back in England. He chases home fast. He says, Dad, I'm back. I want to be a scientist. I want to be like Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell is driving the Geological Society forward. Darwin, not in Burlington House, but Burlington House is a nice place to think about these societies. Darwin says, I want to be part of those professional societies, and that's definitely the case. We know he wanted to be because when he started to publish, after the Beagle, when he started to publish the books that would make his career as a publishing scientist, he told us that he joined these societies. Here's the title page of one of those books coming out of the voyage of the Beagle. You can't read this, so I made it bigger. Well done us. So just dissect this title bit. Charles Darwin, ESQ means he's a gentleman, right? MA, he's got a master's degree, sadly from that crappy provincial university called Cambridge down the road. But look at the rest. FRS. FRS. Fellow Royal Society. I made it. I'm bona fide. It would be like if we put MSU after your names when you graduate, right? PhD, I do it. Not really, but somebody does, right? Somebody does. Secretary of the Geological Society. Again, this is on the title page to a book. What's Darwin doing there? He's just reminding us that he's bona fide. Reminding us that he's part of the gang, that other scientists vouch for him one way or another. You go to London, you go to Burlington House, you see the scientific societies. They'll tell you Darwin worked there. Darwin worked there. That's the fact. The deeper meaning of the fact is it's part of that professional development. It happened in London, and it could only happen in London. It couldn't happen anywhere else. When Darwin came back from the voyage of the Beagle, he went home to say hi to his family, and then he went to Cambridge for a couple of months in order to do some work. But he spent his time going down to London all the time. It's an hour away nowadays on the train. He spent all his time going down to London and staying with his brother, and finally he said, man, I just gotta live in London, because that's where it's happening. And 3 months after he's back from the voyage of the Beagle, Darwin moves to London. He's in London as a bachelor. He's there for a year and a half. He lives with his brother first, and then his brother says, hey man, you gotta move out. You gotta move. I don't want all the science stuff around me. I've got things to do in my own life. Darwin moves around the corner to a flat of his own, and he's there for a couple of years, and then Darwin gets married and moves in with Emma to a house, a proper house, and so on. But while he's in London in order to build his reputation. The great thing about that story is Darwin leaves London when he thinks he's done. Darwin leaves London not because he's bored of the city, because how can you be bored of the city? Darwin leaves London not because he's tired of the city. My God, the city is so tiring. But Darwin leaves London because he's done. He's done the networking, and now he wants to do something else. He feels bona fide, and that's 1842. He leaves London in 1842. They bought the house in Down. They moved out to the village. Darwin feels that he can be connected by other means than face-to-face contact, and so that's a really important thing. Other things you'll see in London, this is just a kind of a throwaway to give you a bit of a break. So if you're bored out of your brains, wake up, this is funny. And if you, you want to know more, then know more. So this is another place in London, and it's a cemetery. And the statue you see is, does anybody recognize the person? Karl Marx. Karl Marx, yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's Karl Marx. And it's the Karl Marx burial site at Highgate Cemetery, which is I'm not going to tell you about the cemetery, but it's an absolute shrine for people who want to talk about Karl Marx. But what's great about this particular photograph, and I think Rich took it, I think I stole this from Rich, is if you take that, you see the blocky grave in the foreground. If you go to take this picture when you go to London, you're in fact right in front of Herbert Spencer, the great Darwinist. Well, Darwin was a great Spencer. It kind of depends on your point of view nowadays. But the connection to Darwin is absolutely important there. And Darwin and Marx and Herbert Spencer together in one little spot. It's an important physicality to that moment in time. Another person buried in Highgate Cemetery is this fella who nobody's heard of, and that's Robert Grant. Robert Grant was, see, you heard of him, that's so good, thank God. Robert Grant is a Scottish professor, and when Darwin went to university in a couple of different places. He went to Edinburgh, and then he went to Cambridge, and that was about the story. When Darwin went to Edinburgh, he first thought he would love it, and then he decided he was going to hate it. But when he studied zoology, he studied with this fella, Robert Grant. And Robert Grant was so excited. He was so excited about sponges. He was the kind of person that you talk to about sponges and you think, you have an unhealthy fascination with sponges. And Robert Grant's unhealthy fascination with sponges was because he was interested in the origin of life. And he thought sponges were right there. He thought sponges were right at the very beginning. And Robert Grant would take his classes down to the ocean to look at sponges, and they would put those like glass periscopes, glass viewers into the water so that you could see the sponges being sponges, I guess. And he would say, there's something important about sponges in the origin of life. There's something important there, and we need to study sponges that way. And most everybody's absolutely convinced that Robert Grant spoke to Darwin about evolution. When Darwin was at university, a decade before Darwin talked about evolution and natural selection. After the Beagle voyage, Robert Grant's important. He's buried in Highgate Cemetery. But he's forgotten pretty much by almost everybody. More about Robert Grant later. Other things about London and Darwin and facts and deeper meanings of facts. These dinosaurs, Rich mentioned already, that are in Crystal Palace, and I'm going to be talking about them later this week.
Friday at 12:30.
Friday at 12:30, thank you, because I was going to say Thursday. It's Friday at 12:30 in geological sciences. Yeah, excellent. And we're going to talk about them and the Great Crystal Palace in 1850s. The Great Crystal Palace up on top of the hill. I'm not going to tell you anything more than that. Dinosaur statues in Crystal Palace. Darwin went to go see the Crystal Palace. Darwin was so cheap. I said that before. Darwin was so cheap. Emma said to him in the 1850s, Emma said, honey, I want to go to the Crystal Palace. Everyone's going to the grand opening. Will you buy us some tickets? And Darwin said, oh man, if I buy the tickets for that, I have to buy the tickets for the whole year. Because it was a really clever marketing trick, that if you wanted to go to the opening night, you had to buy for the whole year. Yeah, that's smart. Smart indeed. And Darwin's like, oh, really? Do I have to? Yes, do it. So he bought the tickets, and Darwin went to the Crystal Palace Park and Exhibition a bunch of times, but only in the first year. He never went after that. Okay, there you go. So more about that on Friday. More about the Crystal Palace dinosaurs. But they're in London, and the story of the dinosaurs obviously connect to what was thrilling in the 1830s when Darwin was living in London. And that was talking about an idea called philosophical geology. Philosophical geology. And basically it's not economic geology, how do we get wealth from the ground, but it's about what the meaning of the things in the ground are for us and the big questions we want to ask. So philosophical geology is about deep time, those fossils in the fossil record, the pattern of the fossils in the fossil record. Darwin definitely thought hard about that, and in the 1830s it was all happening. The best fossils in the world were being discovered in southern England, and Darwin was keyed into the networks that talked about them an awful lot. So if you want to hear more, come to that talk on Friday. Another example, we're talking about trains and infrastructure in London. Euston Station is near where Darwin lived, which I'll say in a minute. The fact of Euston Station is important. Another fact is really much more important, and this is going to, I don't know. Darwin loved trains. Darwin loved trains. He loved trains. He loved trains in the way Grant loves sponges, in an unhealthy fascination with molarity almost, in an unhealthy fascination with a particular topic one way or another. Darwin loved trains, and Euston Station, when Darwin came back from the Beagle, Euston Station was brand new. The concept of a railway network was just getting going in the 1830s. The big railway stations into London were just getting started. What has become Euston Railway Station now was an absolutely brand new railway station. It basically was a railway shed that the trains came up to because they hadn't quite figured out what a railway station ought to be yet. It didn't know how to put a coffee shop into something yet. And it was just getting started. And they were so excited about the new engineering, but kind of scared about the new engineering too, and kind of worried about the aesthetic of the new engineering. So in the 1830s, when Euston Station gets built, they build a gorgeous Greek front to it. And you can see this in some big land-grant universities where they do exactly the same thing. They build the square box buildings like are common here at MSU, and then they stick in front of it the grand Greek, temple bullshit in the front. I'm going to Ann Arbor tomorrow, and I bet you they have some there, don't they? Don't they? Is that right?
Just a little.
Just a little. See, there you go. The arts and sciences interface. Isn't that the balance? Ann Arbor is about the arts, and this is about science. Okay, see, we're all on the money here. We understand. And so the fact to focus on is Darwin loved trains. There were brand new high-tech stuff in the 1830s. When Darwin gets back from the voyage of the Beagle, he loved the trains. The trains connected him between his family home in just think of England as a rectangle, in the upper left-hand corner, and London in the lower right-hand corner. Darwin took the train back and forth all the time. It would be like us taking the space shuttle one way or another. No, that's a bit too strong, but more or less that. Taking a Ferrari. And the train station, here's the business end of the train station. You've got the fancy frontage, then you've got the working shed, and then you've got the trains themselves. Here's a fact that you may not know, Jim. There's a fact about the train that was brand new in the late 1830s that Darwin loved. And that was, most of it was open carriage. So you're basically riding in the back of a pickup truck at about 15 miles an hour for about 2 hours, zipping around the countryside. Chug, 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 chug. Darwin loved that kind of stuff. Rain or shine, in Euston Station in the 1830s when it was brand new was, you're going to love this. And that there's just ever so slight incline down into Euston Station. Ever so slight. But the locomotive engine wasn't strong enough to pull the car back out again right at that moment. So it took about 10 years to build something strong enough to pull a fully weighted carriage out of Euston Station. So what did they do? They built a machine a mile away, and they made a big long rope. And the big long rope, somebody took the big long rope down, tied it onto the carriage, yanked it up roller coaster style, up a mile, and then they attached the engine, and off it went, chugging away. On the other way around, you'd get a mile away from the station, they'd take the engine off, and somebody would just push, and you would just roller coaster down. Darwin loved trains, partly because of that, I think. He absolutely loved trains. Most importantly about the trains, they're brand new in the 1830s, and they connect Darwin between London, where he wanted to be, and home, where he came from. So the top left and the bottom right of England, they connected, and very specifically connected there. And so Darwin was lucky, in a way, that that's where the railroad connected. But nevertheless, it connected him to the places he wanted to be. He loved trains, not just because he was a boy and he liked technology. He loved trains because they got him to where he wanted to be. No surprise that when Darwin chose to marry Emma and chose to find a family home, Darwin chose a street that was about 2 streets away from the train station. Perfect, absolutely perfect. When he's looking for flats, when he's looking for a house for he and Emma, there's a lot of demand for a housing right at that spot because the train's brand new. A lot of people want to live there. Darwin is willing to pay top money for the house, to rent the house. And they're still having trouble. And Darwin says, I want to be here at this spot on Gower Street. I want to be here because it's so convenient for the 2 things I want to do. One is to get to the train so that we can go home. And the other thing is I want to get to the scientific societies to do the business that I want to do in London. So Darwin's choice of home is defined by the things he wants to do. Location matters. The fact of the location matters. So the fact is that Darwin lived on Gower Street in London. Where's Gower Street? It doesn't matter. It's basically right in between the 2 places Darwin wanted to be. And that's certainly true. If you go to Gower Street today, you see this blue plaque. Absolutely. It's around the corner from where I work, so I've taken this photograph an awful lot of times. To see what Gower Street looked like, here's a map of that little corner of London before the train arrives. In the field there where it says Summertown and St. James Burial Ground, it's where the station's going to be built. And then Gower Street is, oh no, it's my exercise. Gower Street's over here. And so you guys better appreciate this because I'm getting a lot of exercise. It's very nice, just wearing the t-shirt. There you go. Gower Street's right there where Darwin's going to live. So close. It's built up like this 20 years later. The rail station is roughly where it says Euston Square. And Darwin's house is going to be right down in that corner. Do I have to run over there?
No.
Oh, thank God. Okay. Right. I'm old, you know. Okay, anyway. This is what it looked like by an artist who sketched this lovely street. This is Gower Street. And it's just a gorgeous part of the town. There's a little gate there which makes it a dead end, a cul-de-sac. Makes it a cul-de-sac which makes it lovely and quiet. Darwin liked quiet at this moment in his life. If you go there today, this is what you see. So if you're on the tour, you're going to see this kind of thing. It's a 4-story house, and the basic layout of a house like this is the kitchen's in the basement, the dining room is on the 1st floor, the entertaining space is what the English call the 1st floor, and then the bedrooms and such are up, and then the servants are at the top. So that's the rough layout of a house like this. Darwin lived on Gower Street. He lived in this kind of house. One thing you'll know by what I just said is that Darwin had servants. The Darwins had servants. Definitely they did. And they entertained an awful lot. They did until really kids got in the way of the entertaining, one way or another. Darwin called the place Macaw Cottage because he did what men do, which is when he was looking for a house to rent, he saw one that he liked and he said, I'll take it. And then he wrote to Emma and said, oh, by the way, do you think it's a good idea? And, oh, by the way, they offered to sell me the furniture, which just happened to have a red sofa and yellow curtains and blue wallpaper. And it just reminded me of this. And when they joked, as couples do, they nicknamed it Macaw Cottage, after the bird, of course. And that was a sign that Emma had for Charles that basically said, you're an idiot. You should have asked me. You have no sense of style, man, basically is what it boils down to. So Macaw Cottage. The fact of Macaw Cottage says something about Darwin's romance more than anything else. Darwin lived on Gower Street when he married Emma. There they are, the wedding portraits. In those days, portraits were done for the parents. And there are two sets of these in existence. One set went to the family of the bride, and the other set went to the family of the groom. And that sort of story goes on. You can see that Darwin is starting to lose it up top. And Emma, lovely Emma, is on her way. Emma's slightly older than Charles. Okay, the fact to remember about this little bit is the Darwins lived on Gower Street. The bigger meaning of that is Gower Street's right in the middle of where Darwin wanted to be, the railway station to go home and the professional circles that he wanted to develop. That's an important part of the interpretation of why they lived on Gower Street as compared to anywhere else. Other things to remember about Gower Street is that's the wedding home, that's the marriage home. Darwin and Charles and Emma were married in the morning at home. Then they rushed to get onto the train to get to London that night. So they spent their wedding night in London. The distance traveled, it would be equivalent of getting married here, roughly, and going, to Madison, Wisconsin, for your wedding night. That's moving pretty fast. The Darwins had sandwiches in the transition station on the way, and that was their wedding dinner. What a cheapie he certainly was. So when they arrived in their wedding, when they arrived in their house on Gower Street, that really is the place where the newlyweds built their life. And that's certainly what the Darwins did. Back to this. Now, one of the things that's really important to remember about Gower Street in Darwin's life is that he lived his life there, and so did Emma. One of the things that happened to the married couple is that they started having kids. The Darwins were married Charles and Emma were married in January 1839. And he says, just do the math. I'll give you a second to do the math. So January 1839, so it's okay. January 1839. And then basically Emma's pregnant for about 15 years between having more kids and whatnot. So it's a lot. Emma's a long way away from home, and she's in London, and she's starting to have kids. The Darwins have 2 children while they're living on Gower Street, and then others follow when they move out to Down House. But the life in London for Charles goes from having just come back from the Beagle, having all kinds of hot scientific stuff, being an ambitious young man wanting to make his way, joining lots of scientific societies, being part of the buzz that is intellectual science in London in the 1830s. And then he decides to marry Emma, moves into Gower Street, and they start having kids. And the kind of work that Darwin does changes because he's spending more time at home, is what it boils down to. And lots of things are happening. Right, I had that fact I wanted to tell you that I discovered, which is so very exciting. Now, getting to that. So if it hurts now, it's going to hurt for another 10 minutes before I get, 10 minutes before I get to the fact. So are you guys with me still?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Oh, yeah? Okay, great. So you've learned a couple things about Darwin. You've learned that the location matters. You learned that there's lots of facts to know about Darwin, but far more important is the larger interpretation of those facts and the meaning of those facts. One thing that everybody asks me about Darwin during his time in London basically is all that stuff you just told me, Joe, is all very gossipy and wonderful, but what kind of science did Darwin do in London? Tell me about the science that Darwin did in London. Really easy. So Darwin gets back from the Beagle in 1836. It was meant to be a year-long voyage. It turned into 5. Historians nowadays, they say, they don't say it this way, but I'll summarize it. Darwin left England on the Beagle as a boy, and he came back as a man. And it's easy to interpret that idea as sort of something happened in Tahiti that we don't really want to know about, but we really do. Darwin left as a boy and came back a man, and really excellent historical research has looked at the diaries that Darwin kept on the voyage. And in the early diaries, Darwin would defer to other people a lot. So Darwin would say, so-and-so has interpreted this material such and such. By the end of the voyage, Darwin is saying, I think this. And the historians have interpreted that, summarized by saying a boy and man. He's moved from being deferential to authoritative. And that's important about the voyage of the Beagle. So when Darwin gets back, he really does jump off the ship because he's decided what he's going to do. He wants to be a scientist. He wants to be a gentleman of science. He wants to be connected. He wants to get some stuff done. He's got lots of ideas, and he wants to start writing. He wants to get going. And he has a massive collection of material. And so in 1836, when the Beagle returns, he does jump off the ship and start running. A couple of months going between home and Cambridge, wasting some time. And then by 1837, Darwin's moved to London as a bachelor, 18 months as a bachelor. Then he gets married, and it's a couple of years in London as a married gentleman of science. Kids start happening. The science is working in all kinds of different areas. Darwin starts to publish. And that's the important thing in this period. Darwin really is beginning his life as a publishing scientist in our terms. These are just a couple of examples. So books start coming out. Darwin is busy working up his material from the voyage of the Beagle. It's a long trip. He's got a lot of material. He's been sending stuff home. Darwin's advocates at home have been receiving it and reading his letters and bigging up. Do you guys use that phrase anymore? Bigging up Darwin. No, you're like, no, we don't use that phrase anymore. Never used in the first place. So I'm going to use it. They exaggerate Darwin. They talk about Darwin. He's got unique material no one's seen before. No one has seen it before. Darwin has it, and he's slowly parsing it out to people. During his London time, he's slowly parsing out. He's encouraging people to write. The Zoology of the Beagle basically is a 5-part, 19-chapter piece. Darwin writes a few of those chapters, but other people are writing others. And Darwin is editing and coaching them on and making sure it's done. He knows his scientific reputation is going to be built on the voyage of the Beagle. And that's certainly true. Darwin also, if we were to stop Darwin in the streets of London and ask him, what are you? What kind of scientist are you? In 1839, 1840, he'd say, I'm a geologist, basically. I'm a geologist. And that's definitely what we see in the publishing record of Darwin's work whilst he's living in London. He is writing on, not sea turtles, but he's writing on corals and coral reefs. He's got a big idea that he can explain how certain coral reefs are formed. They're formed by the geological principles described by my hero, my boyfriend, my bro-friend, that sounds like that's not a word, is it? Bro-friend, my bromance friend, Charles Lyell, the great Charles Lyell. Darwin starts writing geology seen through the lens of Charles Lyell. And that's definitely during the London period in Darwin's life. He's known to people not just as a geologist, but as a Lyellian. Definitely the case that he's trying to promote that. Darwin goes on a trip to Scotland, and he looks at the Highlands, and he comes up with some theories about how peculiar features are formed in the Scottish mountain, in the Highlands. This particular glen or valley is called Glenroy, and you may be able to see the stripy lines there. You may be able to see the stripy lines over here. And Darwin comes up with a theory about how they're formed. And basically his theory is grounded in Charles Lyell and Charles Lyell's approach to geology. And Darwin's thinking is 100% wrong, but that's okay. Later he learns that he's wrong. Doesn't matter. This time he's writing on them. And as a bold, ambitious, career-building scientist, Darwin says, I've been here, I've seen this, I'm going to interpret it according to a theory, and I'm going to publish on it. And that's what he's doing when he's living in London. As I said, Darwin wants to be a disciple of this guy, Charles Lyell. So again, if we walked across Darwin in the street during his London time, we certainly would think of him as a protege of Charles Lyell. Interestingly, Darwin is not a protege of this fella, Robert Grant, who I mentioned before, the Scottish evolutionist who taught Darwin while he was an undergraduate. By the time Darwin was living in London, Robert Grant had moved to London too. He was poached by a different university, and he was teaching in London that just happened to be right around the corner from where Charles and Emma lived. It just happened to be right around the corner from that spot. Darwin didn't visit him once when he was there. And I'll tell you, this is for students, you students. It'll break your professors' hearts if you come live right around the corner and never come visit. It will, won't it? It won't it? It'll break your heart if you don't come and visit and just say hello. Particularly if you went on a field trip down to the thing and you talked about spongers and it was so exciting. But there's an important reason for why Charles didn't associate well with this guy, Robert Grant. And you ask me in the questions, and maybe we'll get there. Maybe I'll avoid you, depends. But definitely, Darwin in the time in London is the time when, this is why it's so important. While Darwin was living in London, Darwin was thinking about evolution, and his ideas were crystallizing. He was reading a lot of stuff. He was talking to a lot of people. He was in the Athenaeum, working through the library, engaging in all kinds of conversations, and the evolution stuff is happening. We know that for sure because the notebooks where the important stuff about evolution start to appear, that stuff is in the Darwin notebooks from the moment when he's living in London. In fact, he's at the Athenaeum drinking a bit of port and enjoying the newspapers, and then he writes this kind of stuff in his notebooks. So London is important. London is important in lots of different ways. Right, okay, so when Darwin, as I said, when Darwin decided that he had had enough of career building, that's when he decided it was time to leave London and to go off to other places. I'm getting to that fact that I wanted to tell you about. In fact, I think we're there. By the time they left in 1842 to go to Downhouse, as I said, Darwin felt like his career was very, very, very well established. Okay, the fact. So, Darwin in London, bringing visitors to London. I was doing a lot of walking tours around London, taking people to Darwin sites. Some of you might come to London as part of the Darwin tour. The fact that I'm going to tell you is connects to that. So when I was putting one of those tours together, I knew that a couple of kids were born in Gower Street. And the first two kids, here's a list of the children in Darwin's in the Darwin family life. And you can see they had 10 children, most of whom survived to adulthood. The first two are the ones that you saw in the photographs, these two, William and Annie. Annie didn't survive into adulthood, but William certainly did. When I was putting together the walking tour about walking around London and trying to connect up with bits of Darwin's life, I came across a bit of information in the biography stuff of Darwin that said that those two children were baptized in a parish church in London that just happened to be right around the corner from the house on Gower Street where Darwin lived. And I thought, yes, this is great, because if I'm going to give a walking tour, I can walk past the plaque and say, that's where Darwin lived. And then I can go around the corner and I can go to the church and I can say, and that's where the children were baptized. And it's fantastic. You draw that physicality all together. And the church happens to have been built at the same time as the railway station. And you can see the kind of classical architecture look to it. So it's done in the same kind of style. And so there's a story that I could tell there. The problem is with that is it's not true. That the biographical material is just wrong because there's no evidence for it. So I went to look at the records, the real primary data of history. I wanted to find the baptism record, the sign in the register that said, kid baptized here. It turns out that those two children, the first two children in the Darwin family, they weren't baptized around the street from the house at Gower Street. Even though Emma gave birth to them there, they weren't baptized right around the corner. I thought they would have been baptized a couple days later, quickly. Child mortality being what it was. You baptize the kids quickly. It turns out that months and months and months later, Emma took the kids back home to be baptized, back to her family church. The first two kids weren't baptized in the local church near their house on Gower Street. the two kids were baptized in the church in a little village called Mare, which is where Emma grew up, which is where Emma was baptized, which is where Emma and Charles were married. It was where one of her relations was the local priest, vicar. It was where everybody in Emma's family was baptized, and it was where most people in Emma's family were married. Emma deliberately didn't baptize her kids around the corner. She kept that important moment for something else. She kept that important moment for a moment to go back to her house. And we know it's her house because that's the church. And if you look that way at that really big house, that's her house. Not bad, eh? So that's the church. That's the house. That's where she was expecting to get buried. You know, it all comes together. What's the fact here? The fact is that the Darwin children were baptized, the first two were baptized here, and not just around the corner in Gower Street near where they lived at the time. What's the meaning of that fact? Well, let's chase this just a little bit more. Now, once I discovered that the biographies were wrong, and I had the primary data for the first two kids, I did what you would expect me to do, which is I just looked for the other kids too. They started to put it together a pattern. This is the data. The ones that say Mare on them, that's the local village. The first two were baptized there, and then one, Mary Eleanor, who was the child who died right at the moment that they had moved down, wasn't baptized back home because they didn't have time, and then the next two were baptized. This was cool. This is important. So I wrote away to the biography, and the National Register, the sort of official biography, the Dictionary of National Biography, and I said, you guys have got it wrong, I've got it right. Here's the data that shows I'm right. You didn't need to change it. And they did. Yes. Thank you.
They listened to a yank.
They listened to a yank
It
with
was
data.
difficult.
Yeah, yeah. The important thing is that I discovered a fact. That's the fact. That's the fact. Well, we're almost done. We're almost done, I promise. I discovered a fact. The fact itself isn't important. The meaning of the fact is. So let's press a little bit further. So as I said, I discovered the fact, I wrote away, we got it corrected, and off we go. I started looking for the other kids and looking for their baptism records. And I started to piece this together. And then I found more. And then I found what I think is a pattern. And you tell me if you think so too. Here's a pattern. Well, most of the kids early on are baptized in Mare, where Emma grew up. And most of the kids later on were baptized in Down, where the family had moved. The Mary Eleanor, number 3, the one in blue, is a special case because that child, you just didn't mess around with not baptizing. And that child was not healthy, and they assumed it was going to die, so they had it baptized quickly. So any port in a storm in that case. But here's the pattern I think is happening here. That early on it's Mare, it's Emma's home. Later on it's Down, Emma's new home. And what's exciting here is I think that there's a pattern here that's much bigger than Emma. I think it's a pattern that even a lot of us have experienced in our own lives. And that is, it has to do with home. It has to do with where you think your home is. Now, here at MSU, there's a lot of people who've come from a very long way away. And the people who do come from a very long way away, they tend to come with a lot of stuff. They tend to come with a lot of connections. And they tend to spend a lot of time being connected to home. But over time, what tends to happen is they start calling home a little bit less. They start writing home a little bit less. They start sending fewer pictures home. And the contact to where they came from, it starts to dissipate. It's because new connections are starting in other places, and new roots are being planted in one place, in that new place. And so the way I summarize it is, where we choose to call home is changing. So I've discovered a fact, which is the first two kids weren't baptized where the records said that they were, and we've changed that, and now we've got a new thing. The meaning of that fact is important. And I think what we're seeing is Emma's just like a lot of people. Emma, not Charles, Emma, she was born and raised in a place where she expected to live her whole life and die. And when she became engaged to Charles, she came to London. She left her home. And a lot of her time was spent going back home, being connected to home. But after they left London and they went to Down, things changed. And home changed. It didn't happen quickly. They may not have even been aware of it. But 10 years later, they're not rushing back to the place where they grew up. What they're doing is they're planting their roots in a new place. And I think what we see here in the baptism records is, it's okay. It's okay in the new place to plant roots like have your kids baptized there. So I discovered a fact, and the fact has meaning. The fact is the first two kids weren't baptized in London, they were baptized at home. The meaning of that larger point is, it doesn't tell us about Charles, it tells us about Emma. But it also tells us a little bit about ourselves. And that for a lot of people we know, they're in the process of evolving their sense of place from one place to another. And it's okay, because home is where we are, not where we've come from or where we're going. And if you remember anything about the talk today, just remember that little smidgen of an idea about what it means to change where you yourself have planted your roots. Because they may have started over there, and they may end up over there. But right for the moment, you're right here. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you at other talks later this week. I'm supposed to take questions, so please, someone ask me something.
Well, that story you said you might tell us about Grant and Darwin.
Oh, right, okay. What's the story about Grant and Darwin? So Grant believes in evolution. He believes in transformation. And his thinking about transformation of species is a lot like development of humans. So you go from kind of an infant stage to an adult stage, and there's a lot of transformation going on. Grant is a well-known political radical, and he believes that political systems ought to evolve as well as biological organisms ought to evolve. And so something like a monarchy is only one stage in the development of a political system. So in other words, change the government one way or another. And Grant is associated with a really radical wing of the political conversation. When Darwin comes back from the Beagle and he decides inclined, but not fundamentalistically conservative. And his broad thinking is, I don't want to get messed up with these radical political types who want to overthrow the system. What I want to do is I want to get on with my science, and I want to live a relatively straightforward life. And Darwin doesn't associate with Grant, because lots of historians think that Darwin doesn't associate with Grant because in the process of doing that, he's going to tarnish his reputation. And Darwin wants to be, it's so odd to say this, but Darwin wants to be anything but controversial. He wants to be right, and he wants to win the argument. But he really, really, really doesn't want to be in the center of some controversial conversation, which is why he pushes a lot of other people into those conversations. And so the story about Robert Grant, his professor from his undergraduate days at Edinburgh, is simply that to associate with Grant when he's now in London is to put him in a reputational risk in a way that he doesn't want to be, doesn't want to have it. So London's important for what he does do and for what he doesn't do. The weirdest thing is that Grant is right around the corner. That's the crazy thing. A person right around the corner that Darwin does interact with is a fellow named Leonard Horner. And Leonard Horner happens to have 5 daughters, 4 of whom are unmarried, and one of whom is Charles Lyell's wife. And so Darwin spends a lot of time at the Horner's house socializing. And the Mrs. Horner is well aware that Darwin is coming from a nice family and coming from a financially stable family, and spends a lot of time trying to pair Charles up with her daughters. And it looks like at one point when Darwin's a bachelor living in London, it looks like he falls in love with at least one of them, and it looks like he goes home to his house, to his father's house, to tell his dad that he wants to marry one of these. And it looks like the dad says, "Oh no, it's not the plan. Your uncle and I have a different plan for you. And it's either Emma or her sister, and work it out." And so there's a weird moment. When Darwin returns after that decision is made that he's going to propose to Emma, he hides out from Mrs. Horner and Leonard Horner. And there's lovely letters from Darwin's brother who says, "Don't even get close to the Horners because she's so mad." And you bloat it with those people. When Darwin's living in London, he's hiding out from his girlfriend's mom, is what it boiled down. Anyway, let's get that on tape. That's good. Right. A couple of other questions. I think you guys have got to go do chemistry, and then we're almost done. Any other questions? Somebody please ask me something.
So, can we go back to the slide with the children and when they were baptized?
Yeah. Oops. Sorry. Well, maybe we can.
Maybe not?
Don't worry, we'll get there. I'm sure we can find it. Go ahead and tell me what you're asking. What you think?
So I'm wondering why Elizabeth was baptized at Down and then Francis was baptized back at Mare. Do we have any kind of explanation for why it may have happened?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's about the. I think the preference was to take Elizabeth to Mare, but if I remember this correctly, there was a change in who the vicar was there, and one of Emma's relations is leaving the vicarage, and a new person is arriving. I think that's right. And basically the choice was to bring a relation to Down to have it done.
So it wasn't that she was sickly and they were worried that...
No. What's absolutely fascinating about this is again, maybe I'm just wrong in my default assumption, which was you baptize children quickly, because if they die without being baptized, that's a problem. And Emma's waiting months and months and months until the next moment is useful to go home again. And it's kind of too long to be accidental, is sort of my thinking. And that is one of the anomalies. But it's also kind of sputtering out. The amount of time that they're spending traveling north is really dropping fast. And again, I think the easiest way to interpret that is they're just that notion of home is just changing.
Yeah. You showed the slide of this geological text, and then you gave us some of the publications, but I didn't pick up when the date of that geological publication was.
With the coral reefs. The book of the coral reefs is 1842. So that's one of the pieces that he's working on. But what the goal of the coral reefs book is his first standout independent analysis of something important geological. And it's not so explicitly connected to the machinery of publishing the results of the Beagle voyage. And for Darwin, I suppose we would say it's his first standalone book. And that's absolutely crucial. He's doing it deliberately as a publishing strategy, I think. It begins a publishing career in a way that I think is really important for thinking about Darwin, that everyone remembers Darwin as being rich and doesn't need to work for a living and that kind of stuff. I don't think that's true. He's well off, certainly, but he also is earning good money publishing, one way or another, publishing books. And publishing, I wouldn't say blockbusters, but the book we remember as The Voyage of the Beagle did sell extremely well, and there's money to be made there. But now, did I answer your question before going off on that weird tangent? Yeah. Okay. But he's a geologist right at that moment. While he's in London, he's definitely a hard rock geologist. Okay. Yes.
When was Darwin an undergraduate in Edinburgh?
Rich? Before the Beagle voyage. That's such a cheat. Sorry about that. So I thought it was 28, 29?
Yeah.
In that 1828, 1829 range. I'm going to say it just sounds awful. Students just don't listen. The Wikipedia page is really good. Yeah, it's really good for this. Yeah, yeah. But he's there for a year, and he just doesn't take to it. And you know, if anybody's been to Edinburgh for more than a couple of weeks,
Oh.
There's a larger context question, which would be its own whole literature, its own whole lecture.
Yes.
So I guess I'll try to bring it back to Darwin.
Yes.
The late 20s
Yes.
seem to have been late, just after the heyday when Edinburgh was the center of geological advancement in the English-speaking world.
Yes.
And by the time he gets back from the Beagle voyage, London has become the center. Everybody's moved to London.
Yes.
What does it reflect about Darwin that he picked up on this shift, which basically happened between, you know, Hutton and Playfair, when people like Benjamin Silliman would go over to Edinburgh to learn their geology from him in the kind of 1810 time frame, to by 1840, even before 1840, London has become. What does it say about his awareness of the scholarly power that he was in the midst of that just few decades of shift and picked up on it and made the shift with the discipline?
Yeah, sadly, I don't think it says much, because I think that the time at Edinburgh before the voyage of the Beagle, I don't think Darwin has decided that geology is the thing he wants to do. I think broadly it's natural history, and I think he's just feeling around to see what area will catch his fancy the most. And he's not that serious a student in the first place, and so I think he's responding to the kind of to the organisms and the specimens. I think that's how he's responding. And then the charisma of the lecturing. I think that's important too. And he's getting that charisma from somebody like Grant, and he's not getting it from some other people. There's the geology professor that he engages with. I think he writes some rather nasty notes himself, saying this is the most boring stuff I've ever had. Yeah. And so there's a negative there as well as a draw elsewhere. Yeah.
All right, well, everybody,
No, I was just going to say, just to complicate, I really like your analysis of this. Just to complicate it a little bit, taking 6 children back to Mare by then might be another further complication of this, of the cost and expense, since you're mentioning how that cost and expense, but also as parents to take 6 children back. And then the servants that would be required and everything else, that becomes...
The logistics are important.
I love your analysis, but I would put that further kind of complication there of taking that many children.
That's really great. If you didn't hear that, the idea is that taking a bunch, by this point, taking a bunch of kids back to the family home takes energy and effort, and maybe it's just prohibitive. And it's a great way to double check this conclusion. And the way I would check it is, in fact, I'm going to go do this. The way to check this is just to see if they are moving back and forth at all, and who's going and who isn't. Yeah, that's a great point. So thank you for that. That was definitely worth waiting for, wasn't it? Yeah.
That was very much worth waiting for. So everybody join me in thanking Professor Joe Cain.